I want to tell you something before I get into this. I've thought a lot about how to start this story. Whether to start with him, or with the end, or with the specific Tuesday night I was lying on my couch scrolling through my phone like a completely normal person, and had my entire understanding of the past 8 months rearranged in about 4 seconds flat. I keep coming back to the Tuesday night, because that's the one that changed the shape of everything that came before it, and I think you need to understand the before the after makes any sense. So, Tuesday, 11-something at night. I was tired in the low-grade, nothing specific way that accumulates when you've been telling yourself you're fine for a few weeks, and the effort of it is starting to cost something. I was on my couch in the dark, just the phone light, doing that thing where you're not really looking for anything, but you keep scrolling anyway because stopping feels like being alone with your thoughts, and your thoughts haven't been great company lately. I got to Derek's profile. I don't know why I went there. I hadn't been checking it. Or maybe I had been, a little, in the careful way where you tell yourself you're just looking and it means nothing. His account was private when we were together private, which at the time I'd understood as a personality trait rather than a strategy, but 3 weeks earlier he'd gone public. I'd noticed. I hadn't said anything to myself about noticing. There was a new post. Him and a woman. Outdoor setting, golden hour. The kind of photo that looks effortless and definitely wasn't. She was facing the camera. He was looking at her. His hand was extended, and there was a ring box open in his palm, and her hands were over her mouth, and 412 people had already liked it. The caption said, "She said yes." I read it 3 times. Then I put the phone face down on my chest and stared at the ceiling for a while. Here is what I want to say about that moment, and I want to say it carefully because I've thought about it a lot since. I wasn't just blindsided by someone I used to date. That would have been painful in an ordinary way, the ordinary way breakups hurt. The ordinary grief of something ending. I knew what that felt like. This was different, because what I was staring at on that ceiling wasn't just the fact that he'd moved on. It was the timeline. It was the math of it. It was the slow, cold realization that the person I had spent 8 months believing in had not been doing the same thing I was doing. I wasn't blindsided by someone who left. I was blindsided by someone who had let me believe I was real to him. If you've ever been someone's secret, not just a crush, not just a situationship, but an actual secret they maintained while building a completely different life right next to yours, you already know the specific quality of that feeling. It doesn't feel like heartbreak right away. It feels like disorientation. Like the floor has shifted 2 inches and everything is still standing, but nothing is quite level anymore. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you're new here, subscribe, because I promise this story goes somewhere worth following and I could use the company while I tell it. Okay, let me tell you about Derek from the beginning. I started at the studio about 14 months ago. Small place, 8 people. Open floor plan. The kind of office that tries to look casual but has very specific opinions about font choices, and will argue about them at length. I liked it. I liked having my own desk and a reasonable manager and work that felt like it actually required something from me. Coming from a year of freelancing alone in my apartment, walking into a room of actual humans every morning felt almost indulgent. Derek was already there when I arrived. Senior designer, 3 years in, the kind of person who has a quiet authority in a room without performing it. He wasn't loud. He wasn't the type who dominated conversations or needed everyone to track him. He just had this quality of being present, I guess. Attentive in a way that felt specific when it was aimed at you. He aimed it at me pretty early on. Not obviously. Nothing you could point to. Just the way he'd stop by my desk to look at what I was working on. Genuinely curious rather than supervisory. The way he'd bring back a second coffee from the corner place without making it a thing, just set it down next to my keyboard with a half shrug when I looked up. The way, in meetings, when I said something he'd respond to it directly instead of talking over it. Which sounds like a low bar, but in that particular office was notable. I noticed him. I wasn't trying to, but I noticed. The first time we were actually alone together was a Thursday evening about 3 weeks in. Everyone else had gone home. I was still at my desk finishing a project that had gone sideways, staring at a screen with the particular expression of someone who has stared at something too long and can no longer see it. Derek came out of the back office with his jacket on, ready to leave, and stopped when he saw me still there. "How bad is it?" he asked. I showed him the screen. He pulled up a chair, sat down, and spent 40 minutes helping me fix it. Not taking over, helping. There's a difference, and I noticed it. When we finally shut down the computers, it was past 8. The office was dim and quiet, city sounds coming in low from outside. We walked out together and stood on the sidewalk for a moment in that particular after-work stillness. "You eat yet?" he asked. I hadn't. We went to a Thai place 2 blocks away and sat across from each other at a small table in the back and talked for 2 hours about things that had nothing to do with work. His family in Ohio, a road trip I'd taken the summer before, a documentary we'd both seen recently that had completely different effects on us. He laughed at something I said and leaned back in his chair. And I remember thinking carefully, the way you think things, you're not fully ready to think that I was in some amount of trouble here. We walked back toward the subway together. At the corner where we split directions, he stopped and looked at me with that direct, specific attention he had. "This was good," he said. "Yeah," I said. He held my gaze for a second. Then, "We should do it again." I told myself that was just how some people talked. Friendly. Normal. I went home and made myself not think about it. I was not successful. The next few weeks were a kind of slow, building thing I didn't have a name for yet because I wasn't ready to name it. More late evenings, more coffees that appeared on my desk, small moments that accumulated in a way that felt deliberate but could, if I needed them to, be explained as something else. And then one night, it was a Tuesday actually, which is its own particular irony, he texted me after 10 asking if I wanted to see his new place. He'd just moved in. He said he'd finally unpacked the kitchen and wanted to cook something that wasn't from a delivery app. I sat with my phone for a minute. Then I said yes. His apartment was on the 4th floor of a building in a neighborhood slightly nicer than mine. The elevator opened onto a hallway with good lighting, warm and clean. He answered the door in a dark t-shirt and jeans, slightly damp hair, looking like he'd been home for a while and wasn't trying. I stepped inside. The apartment was nice, not in a showroom way, in a lived-in way, like someone had made actual choices about what they wanted in a space. Books arranged without being precious about it. A print on the wall I recognized and liked. A kitchen that smelled like garlic and something herby. I remember noticing something. All the windows that faced the street, the ones that looked out over the sidewalk, where someone passing might see in, had their blinds pulled. The light inside was warm and contained. A lamp on the side table. The kitchen overhead. Nothing from outside. I remember thinking it was a private person thing. A cozy apartment in the city thing. I didn't understand yet what the darkness was actually for. What happened that night, I'm not going to walk through all of it, because it's mine and it's private. And anyway, the details aren't the point. The point is that something real started there. Real to me. The kind of real that makes you reconfigure things afterward. Lie awake in a good way. Replay small moments on the subway the next morning and feel warm in the chest about it. We didn't talk about what it was. That part came later, or rather, it came in the form of what we didn't say. I called Cass the next day. Cass had been my closest friend for almost 4 years at that point. The kind of friend who knows your communication patterns well enough to tell when you're leading up to something. I'd barely said hello before she asked, "What happened?" I told her about Derek. Not everything, just the shape of it. Enough for her to understand this was something I was taking seriously. She asked the right questions. Whether I'd met his friends, whether we'd made any plans beyond that night, whether he'd said anything about what this was going to be. I said not yet, but that we were figuring it out. I said he wasn't the type to rush things. I said he was private, that some people were just like that. Cass was quiet for a second, then, "As long as you're okay, Rye." "I'm okay," I said. "I really think this is something." "Then I hope it is," she said. I believed her. I believed myself. I went to sleep that night feeling, for the first time in a while, like something good had started. The next 8 months were the most confusing of my life in a way I only understand now in retrospect, because there were things that were genuinely good moments with Derek that felt intimate and real and specific to us. Conversations that went long into the night, a shorthand we'd developed, inside references that belonged only to us, the accumulated warmth of someone who knew how you took your coffee and what made you laugh and where the precise line was on topics you didn't like to talk about. And alongside all of it, underneath all of it, woven through it so gradually I stopped noticing, we didn't exist anywhere anyone could see. Not at work there. We were colleagues. Friendly. Nothing more. He didn't avoid me. Wasn't cold. Just maintained a perfectly calibrated professional distance that I understood was necessary and told myself was temporary. At the one company event I attended in those 8 months, He arrived alone, left alone, and in the 4 hours between he spoke to me exactly twice, both times briefly, both times with other people present. I drove home afterward and sat in the parking garage beneath my building for a while before going up. Not restaurants we might run into anyone. Not his friends. Not mine. Except Cass, who knew and worried quietly and didn't push. No photos, not because we were never in photogenic situations, but because a photo would be evidence of something that he was not yet ready to be evidence of. No plans more than a few days out, because plans implied a future, and a future implied a conversation we weren't having. Every time I got close to that conversation, he'd say something that pulled me back from the edge of it. I care about you. You know that, right? I'm just not good at moving fast. Give me a little time. And he'd say it with his full attention on me. That specific quality of presence he had. And I'd believe him because I wanted to believe him, and because when it was just the two of us, in his apartment with the blinds pulled and the lamplight warm and contained, it felt like enough. I told myself the public part would come, that the private part was the real part, that patience was what love asked for sometimes. The parking garage was cold and fluorescent. I sat there maybe 15 minutes before I made myself go inside. I got very good at that. The going inside, the telling myself, the patient, practiced work of explaining away the parts that didn't add up. I don't say that to make myself sound pitiful. I say it because I want you to understand that when something starts this quietly, you don't always see it for what it is. You're not stupid. You're not even exactly in denial. You're just choosing, over and over again, to believe the best available version of the situation, because the alternative means looking at something you're not ready to look at yet. That was me. For 8 months, that was me. And then came the Tuesday in November when a text arrived that I read 4 times in the bathroom of my apartment before I put my phone face down on the counter and stood there looking at the wall. Pour sentence. I stood at that counter for a long time. The text said 4 things. I think we need to stop. I'm sorry. You deserve better. Please don't make this complicated. I memorized them without trying to. That's the thing about short messages that carry a lot of weight. They don't have enough words to get lost in. So your brain just absorbs the whole thing immediately, holds it up like something you're trying to identify, turns it over and over looking for a way it means something other than what it means. I put my phone face down on the bathroom counter, looked at my own reflection for a second, which was a mistake because my face was doing something I didn't want to look at. Then I went to the kitchen and made dinner. Pasta, from what I had. I boiled the water and salted it and stirred it and ate it standing at the counter watching nothing in particular, and the whole time some part of my brain was running quietly in the background like a process I hadn't opened but couldn't fully close. That was a Tuesday. By Thursday I had read the text maybe 30 more times, not looking for a hidden meaning, more like pressing on it, the way you press on a bruise to understand the edges of it. I think we need to stop. Present tense. First person, I think, which technically left room for uncertainty, while communicating nothing uncertain. You deserve better. The kind of thing that sounds considerate if you don't look at it too long. Please don't make this complicated. That one I kept coming back to. The way it framed the situation as something I might ruin by responding incorrectly. The way it made the burden of how this went, how clean it stayed, how undramatic somehow mine to carry. I didn't respond. I'm still not sure whether that was dignity or shock or some combination that I can't fully separate even now. I just didn't. I put the phone down and went to work and sat at my desk and stared at projects and did the parts of the job that didn't require full cognitive function, which fortunately was most of them that week. Derek was in the office when I arrived Friday morning. He was already at his desk, headphones on, coffee beside him, looking at his screen with the focused and slightly closed-off expression he wore when he was deep in something. Normal, completely, unremarkably normal. He glanced up when I walked past, gave me a brief nod the way you nod at a colleague you see every day and have no particular history with, and looked back at his screen. I went to my desk, sat down, opened my laptop. The office hummed around me. Someone in the kitchen was making tea. A phone rang twice and stopped. Outside, the city was doing what the city always did, indifferent and continuous. I thought, okay, so that's what this is going to look like. I want to be clear about something, because I think it's important, and I think if I gloss over it, I'm not being honest with you or with myself. I did not fall apart at my desk that day. I didn't cry in the bathroom. I didn't send a long message or try to get him alone to talk. I sat at my desk and I did my work and I ate lunch at my usual spot. And I went home at 5:30 like a person whose life was proceeding normally. And I have thought about that a lot. Why it went so quiet in me so quickly. Why I didn't fight for it or demand an explanation, or even ask a single follow-up question. Part of it was shock, I think. The kind that manifests as function rather than collapse. But part of it, and I'm only saying this because this story isn't useful to anyone, if I'm not honest, part of it was that somewhere underneath the hurt and the confusion, there was something that almost recognized it. Something that had been watching the signs accumulate for months, and had been choosing, over and over, to look past them. That part wasn't surprised. That part just quietly said, "Oh, finally," and then felt terrible for saying it. I called Cass on Saturday morning. Late morning. The kind of hour where the weekend has established itself enough that there's no urgency to anything. Just the low open space of a day without plans. She answered on the third ring, sounded like she'd been awake for a while. Asked how I was in a voice that meant she was genuinely asking. I told her, not in pieces. Not slowly, I'd been holding it for 4 days, and when I finally started, I couldn't find a reason to stop. The text, the 4 sentences, the way he'd looked at me at work on Friday, like I was just someone he knew from the building. The 8 months of the parking garages and the pulled blinds and the careful, maintained distance in every room that had other people in it. Cass listened the way she always listened, fully, without filling silences, without rushing me toward a conclusion. When I finally ran out of words, there was a pause. Then she said, "Ryan, I'm so sorry." "I know," I said. "You don't deserve that." "I know," I said again, and I meant it, or I was trying to mean it, which might not be the same thing. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Not really. But I'm functional. I'm going to work and eating and sleeping. So that kind of okay. That's enough for right now." We talked for another hour. About nothing specific. Just the kind of conversation that keeps you company without asking anything of you. She made me laugh twice, which I didn't expect and was grateful for. By the time we hung up, I felt, if not better exactly, at least less like I was carrying it completely alone. And here is where I have to tell you something. When I think about that phone call now, I notice things I didn't notice then, or rather I noticed them, filed them without labeling them, and moved on. Because that's what I was good at. You already know that about me. There was a moment, toward the end of the call, where I said something about not understanding why he'd ended it that way. Without a real conversation. Without an explanation that made any sense. And I said more to myself than to her. More like thinking out loud, did he ever even think about what this was to me? Cass went quiet. Not a long silence. Maybe 2 seconds. 3 at most. "I'm sure he did," she said. And then immediately, smoothly, moved us into something else, a story about her week. Something that had happened with her roommate. Easy and light and redirect. 2 seconds. 3 at most. I noticed it and set it aside and let her redirect me and thought, she's just being careful. She doesn't know what to say. That's what it is. I filed it away. I got good at filing things away. The next 3 weeks were a particular kind of hard that is difficult to describe without making it sound more dramatic than it actually felt. Because it wasn't dramatic. It was just dull. Persistent. The kind of hurt that doesn't peak. Just maintains. Like a low-grade headache that doesn't stop you from functioning but is always there. Just below the surface of everything. I went to work every day. I sat 10 feet from Derek 4 days a week and performed the same colleague-level normalcy he had immediately, effortlessly established. He was friendly, never unkind, never avoidant in a way that would be obvious, just present in the way coworkers are present, nothing more. I started wondering whether I had imagined the whole thing, which I knew was not rational. But grief does irrational things to your perception, makes you doubt the accuracy of your own memory, makes you question whether what you experienced was as real as it felt. I had coffee with Cass one afternoon in the 3rd week, a place near her apartment, small and familiar. She watched me across the table with that careful attention she'd had since we'd first become friends, the kind that notices things you're not saying. "How are you doing?" "Actually," she said. "Getting through it," I said. "I keep trying to understand why. Like what I did, or didn't do, or what was missing." Cass shook her head. "It's not about something you did." "Then why?" "Ryan." She said my name in the particular way that meant stop. "Some people can't, they're not able to be in something real. That's about them, not you." I looked at her. "What do you mean, can't be in something real?" Do you know something about him? She picked up her cup, took a sip. I just mean generally. Some people aren't built for it. That feels weirdly specific to him, I said. It's not. Her voice was even, her expression calm. I'm talking about a type of person. I watched her for a second. She met my eyes without flinching, without hesitation. The practiced steadiness of someone who has thought about this conversation in advance. And I noticed it. The slight deliberateness of it. The way she was giving me exactly enough to be comforting without giving me anything I could ask a follow-up question about. Did you know something? I asked. Quietly. Not accusatory, just the question, placed down between us. She looked at me. Something moved behind her eyes, fast and controlled. No, she said. Of course not. A beat. I would have told you, she added. I nodded, picked up my own cup, let the conversation move forward because she was my best friend and I had no reason not to trust her, and because the alternative, sitting with what I thought I'd seen in those 2 seconds, was more than I could do. That afternoon, I filed it away. I walked home from that coffee feeling slightly emptier than when I'd arrived, which wasn't what I'd expected. Cass always made things lighter. Today something had stayed heavy. I didn't understand why. I let another week pass. Then another. I started to think the worst of it was behind me, not healed, not resolved, but survivable, in a way it hadn't felt in November. I started to think I could get through this in the ordinary, gradual way things get gotten through, and come out the other side with just a scar and some hard-won knowledge about what I needed to look for and what I needed to run from. I started to think the chapter was closed. And then one Sunday evening I was sitting on my couch with my legs folded under me, phone in my hand, doing that thing where you're not looking for anything specific, just drifting. I'd been avoiding Derek's profile. I want to be clear about that. I had been deliberately, consciously not looking at it. But the algorithm, or fate, or my own hand moving slightly on autopilot, took me somewhere near it. And his profile had more recent activity than it had had before. Public now, where it had been private. New posts. I told myself I wasn't going to look at the timestamps. I looked at the timestamps, and then I sat very still on my couch and did math that I did not want to do and that answered, very precisely and very finally, a question I hadn't known I was asking. The photos were not all recent. Some of them went back months. Some of them went back to a time when we were when I thought we were. There she was, smiling. In a restaurant I would have been asked not to suggest because he'd said he wasn't feeling that neighborhood lately. There she was. At a gathering I hadn't been invited to because he'd said it was just a work thing. There she was, in August, in a photo with a timestamp that put it 11 days after he'd told me, in that lamplit apartment with the blinds pulled, that I was someone he didn't want to lose. 412 likes. She said yes. I put the phone down on the couch cushion beside me, faced up. The room was quiet around me, the evening light going gray through the window. I thought about the 4 sentences. You deserve better. I turned that one over for a moment, really looked at it, and then finally, for the first time, saw it for exactly what it was. Not a kindness, not even an apology, just a clean exit line from someone who had already been somewhere else for a very long time. I wasn't the relationship he was in while figuring himself out. I was the relationship he kept in the dark while he was building the one that was going to matter. The timestamps blurred slightly. I blinked. My phone was still face up beside me. Cass's name was in my recent contacts, right there at the top. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I picked up the phone and pressed call. She picked up on the second ring. Hey, she said. Her voice had that slightly careful quality it gets when she's been expecting a call and doesn't want to show it. What's up? I need to show you something, I said. Can I come over? A pause. Short, but there. Yeah, of course. I took the subway. 20 minutes. Standing near the door. Phone in my jacket pocket. Not looking at it. The car was half full with Sunday evening people, a couple sharing headphones, a woman with grocery bags, a teenager asleep against the window. Everyone living their own, completely separate and unrelated life. I remember finding that oddly grounding. The world was very large, and it was continuing without any particular awareness of what I was carrying, which was either comforting or terrible depending on how you held it. Cass answered the door in sweats, her hair up, something cooking on the stove behind her. Her apartment always smelled like whatever she was making and a specific candle she'd been buying for years, cedar and something citrus. Normally, that smell made me feel immediately at ease. Tonight I stepped inside and my chest stayed tight. "You hungry?" she asked. I made too much? As usual. "No," I said. "Cass." She turned from the stove and looked at me. Read something in my face. Her expression shifted not to guilt exactly. Not yet. Just to a kind of alertness. The way someone looks when they understand that what's coming requires them to be fully present. "Sit down," she said. "I don't want to sit down." I took out my phone, opened the profile, found the photos I'd been looking at an hour ago, and held the screen out toward her. "Look at the dates." She looked. Her eyes moved across the screen slowly. I watched her face and not the phone because I already knew what was on the phone. What I needed to see was her. She looked for maybe 15 seconds. Then she handed it back. For a moment she didn't say anything. She turned back to the stove and turned the burner off, slowly, like she needed something to do with her hands. Then she stood there facing the counter with her back to me. "Cass." My voice came out quieter than I intended. "How long did you know?" She didn't answer immediately. "Please don't do the thing where you take a long time to say nothing," I said. "I've been doing math for the past hour and I need you to talk to me." She turned around. Her arms were crossed, not defensively, more like she was holding herself together. Her face had changed. The careful, composed version of Cass that had sat across from me at the coffee shop 2 weeks ago was gone. What was left looked more tired, more real. "Month 3, she said. The room went very quiet. "Month 3, I repeated. "He called me." She exhaled. I didn't go looking for it, Ryan. He reached out to me, said he'd gotten my number from someone at your work, and that he wanted to talk to me because he knew we were close." She paused. "He said he cared about you and he wanted someone who knew you to understand what was going on." I stood very still. What did he say was going on? He said he was figuring things out, that he wasn't in a place to be fully out, and he needed more time. He made it sound like... She stopped. Started again. "He made it sound like he was protecting you, like keeping it quiet was temporary, and it was his issue to work through, and he would work through it." Her voice had gone flat in the way voices go when the speaker is angry at themselves. "And I was 23 and you seemed happy and I didn't know how to blow up something that was making you happy based on a phone call from a guy I'd never met." "But you knew," I said. "For 5 months. You sat across from me and told me you didn't know anything." "I know. You told me you would have told me." "I know, Ryan." Her voice broke slightly on the last word. "I know what I said." I turned away from her, walked to her window and stood there looking out at the street. Sunday evening, the block quiet. A dog walker passing under the streetlight below. I was trying to locate what I was feeling because it was large, and it was several things at once, and I needed to know what it was before I could speak from it. I was angry. That was real and present and clear. But underneath the anger, something else, something that had nothing to do with Cass or even with Derek. Something that belonged entirely to me. It was pressing up from somewhere low in my chest, and I didn't want to look at it yet, but I could feel it there, patient and waiting. "Did he tell you about her?" I asked, still facing the window. "No." Her answer came quickly. "That I genuinely didn't know. I didn't know about her until you called tonight. Ryan, I swear to you, I believed her. I believed her about that, which almost made it worse because it meant that Derek had managed her too, had given her just enough of the truth to make her complicit without giving her enough to actually protect me. He used you," I said. "I let him," she said quietly. I told myself I was doing the right thing, but I didn't want to be the one to ruin it. And that was selfish. I know it was selfish. I turned back around. She was still standing by the stove, arms still crossed, looking at me with an expression I'd never seen on her before. Cass was usually the most composed person in any room. Right now she just looked like someone who had been carrying something too heavy for too long and had finally been asked to put it down. I sat down on her couch. Not because I felt calm, just because my legs were tired. For a while neither of us spoke. The candle on her coffee table was burning low. Outside, a car passed. The silence was the kind that isn't empty, it's full. Packed with everything that's been said and everything that hasn't been yet. I kept asking myself what I did wrong, I said eventually. For weeks. I kept going back through everything, trying to find the thing I could have done differently. Cass sat down in the chair across from me. "That wasn't yours. I know that now." I looked at my hands. "But here's the thing I've been sitting with since I left my apartment tonight. The part I can't stop thinking about." I paused. He didn't make me stay in the dark. I mean, he created the situation. But I kept choosing to be in it. Every single time I drove home alone from something I should have been at with him. Every time I stood at a party 3 feet away and pretended I didn't know him beyond work. Every time he said, "Give me a little more time," and I said, "Okay." I stopped. I said, "Okay," so many times. "Because you trusted him," Cass said. "Because I thought that's what you did when you cared about someone. You were patient. You didn't push. You gave them the room they said they needed." I looked up at her. But at some point, patience stops being a virtue and starts being, I don't know, permission. Like I was handing him permission to keep me hidden by never once saying out loud that I didn't want to be. Cass was watching me carefully, not interrupting, just listening. "I think part of me believed," I said slowly, "that the hidden version was what I was worth, that the real thing, the visible, public, ordinary thing where you just exist with someone without strategizing about who might see, that wasn't available to me. And because I believed that, I accepted something that confirmed it, and then I stayed in it for 8 months and called it love." The room was very still. Cass reached forward and put her hand over mine on the armrest. She didn't say anything. She just kept it there, warm and steady. And I sat with that for a moment and felt something in my chest loosen slightly, not release. Not yet, but the first movement in that direction. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you," she said finally. "I know," I said. "That's not enough." "No," I agreed. "But it's where we're starting." She nodded. Her eyes were wet, which for Cass was significant. She wasn't a crier. Hadn't been in all the years I'd known her. I squeezed her hand once and let go. We sat together for another hour. I ate some of whatever she'd made, eventually, because she asked and I was actually hungry, and some things are simple. We talked about practical things, whether I should consider leaving the studio, whether I needed to find a therapist. Small, actionable steps that gave the evening somewhere to go. By the time I left, it was past 10 and the street outside her building had gone fully quiet. I walked to the subway slowly. Here is what I want to tell you about the weeks after that. I thought that after the conversation with Cass, after naming it all out loud, the things Derek had done, the things I had let happen, the ways I'd actively participated in my own disappearing, I thought I would feel better. Like naming something definitively closes it. Like understanding why something happened makes the hurt of it smaller. It doesn't work like that. You probably know that. But I needed to find out for myself. What actually happened was a slow, unglamorous process of sitting with things I'd been too busy managing to actually feel. I went to work. I came home. I started seeing a therapist. Her name was Dr. Osei. She was direct in the way that some people find abrasive, and I found like cold water, necessary and clarifying. She asked me, in our second session, when I first remembered feeling like I needed to make myself smaller to be acceptable to someone. I sat with that question for a very long time. The answer, when it came, was not about Derek. It was older than Derek. It was the quiet accumulation of a lot of smaller things across a lot of years, the codes you learned to crack growing up, the particular adaptations of someone who figured out early that certain parts of themselves were best kept interior, and who got so good at the keeping that it started to feel like just the way things were. Derek hadn't taught me to hide. He had found me already fluent in it, and used that fluency. And I had let him because being hidden felt familiar enough to mistake for something else. I don't say that to let him off the hook. He knew exactly what he was doing. But this story stops being useful to me if I only locate the problem in him. About 3 weeks after the conversation with Cass, a woman from my work named Jen invited me to an art show. Small gallery, a friend of hers exhibiting, low-key, the kind of event where you stand around with a plastic cup of mediocre wine and look at things on walls and have the conversations that start about art and end up somewhere else entirely. I almost didn't go. I was still in the mode where social things required more calculation than they used to. Is this a place I'll have to be fine when I'm not fine? Is there an easy exit? How long before I can leave without it being notable? But Jen had been kind to me in quiet ways since November without making it into a thing, and I wanted to be someone who showed up for that. The gallery was small and warmly lit and slightly crowded. I got a drink and stood near a piece I actually liked, abstract, a lot of deep blue and something that looked almost like handwriting layered underneath the paint, and I was in the middle of reading the artist's statement when someone moved to stand beside me. "The text underneath is real," he said. "Not to me specifically, more to the air between us. The way you might say something out loud that you've been thinking privately. It's letters the artist wrote to people they never sent them to. They painted over them, so it's all still in there. You just can't read it anymore." I looked at him. He was about my height. Dark jacket. Easy way of standing. He glanced over when he felt me looking and said, "Sorry, I read the whole wall card earlier and I've been wanting to tell someone about it." "Don't apologize," I said. "That's actually," I looked back at the piece. "That changes how it looks completely, right?" He turned to face it properly. "All that blue is sitting on top of all these things that were said and never got to land anywhere." We stood there looking at it together for a moment. His name was Marcus. He was there because he knew the artist from years back, a friendship from college that had survived geography and time. He was warm in an uncomplicated way, the kind of easy social presence that doesn't require anything of you, that just makes the room feel slightly more habitable. We talked about the work for a while and then about other things, the way conversations move when they're going well, and at no point did I feel the familiar internal monitoring that had become such second nature to me. The checking, is this okay? Is this too much? Will this require explaining later? I was just talking to a person. About 40 minutes in, something came up about where he lived, a neighborhood on the east side, and he mentioned his partner, easily and in passing, a man named Theo who'd stayed home tonight with their dog. Just mentioned it, the way people mention their partner when it comes up naturally. Not as a declaration, not as a thing to manage, just as part of the ordinary fabric of talking about your life. Something shifted in my chest. Not jealousy, not longing exactly. Something quieter than that. I was looking at the simplest possible version of a thing I hadn't been able to have, and the simplicity of it was more striking to me than any complicated feeling. He was just talking about his life, the whole thing, openly, to a stranger in a gallery. Without a second thought, I stayed at the show for another hour. Exchanged numbers with Marcus because he mentioned a similar show coming up next month that he thought I'd like. We said goodbye at the door, easy and natural, and I stepped out into the cold evening air and stood on the sidewalk for a minute before starting toward the subway. I took out my phone, not to text anyone, not to check anything. I opened Instagram and I stood there on the sidewalk outside the gallery and I scrolled through my own profile, looking at it as an object, from a slight distance, the careful curation of someone who had been thinking, for years, about what was acceptable to put out. The neutral, guarded quality of it. Nothing wrong with any of it, nothing that showed anything, either. I opened the camera, took a photo. Just me, there on the sidewalk, the gallery window behind me, the reflection of the streetlights on the wet pavement. Not a great photo, not styled or considered. Just me, where I was, what I actually looked like at that specific moment in my actual life. I posted it before I could think about it. No caption, no location tag, nothing that required explanation. I stood there for a second after I'd done it, waiting for something, anxiety, second thoughts, the familiar pull to take it back. But there was just the quiet of the street and the distant sound of the city and my own breathing. Steady. It was the smallest possible thing. My hands weren't even shaking. I put my phone in my pocket and started walking toward the subway. Behind me, somewhere in the gallery, someone was still standing in front of that painting, all that blue, and everything hidden underneath it, all those unsent things sitting in the dark where nobody could read them. I walked in the opposite direction. The photo got 14 likes overnight. I know that because I checked it the next morning, which I'm telling you because I want to be honest about the fact that I checked it. I woke up at 7, lay there for a moment in the gray early light, and the first thing I did was reach for my phone. Not anxiously, more like checking on something you planted and aren't sure will survive. 14 likes. A few people I knew from work, a couple from college. Marcus, who I'd been standing next to on a sidewalk less than 12 hours earlier, and who had apparently found my account sometime between then and now. It was a bad photo. Slightly blurry, the light was uneven. I looked tired in a way the camera had no interest in softening. It was also the most honest thing I'd posted in longer than I wanted to calculate. I put the phone down and made coffee and stood at my kitchen window watching the street for a while. It was early enough that the block was still quiet, just a delivery truck, and a woman walking a large, unhurried dog, the kind of morning that doesn't ask anything of you yet. I thought about the painting, all that blue sitting on top of all those unsent things, all that weight underneath the surface, invisible to anyone who didn't know to look for it. I thought about all the ways I had been doing that, not just with Derek before Derek, parallel to Derek, continuing in the quiet habits I'd built so gradually I'd stopped recognizing them as habits at all. The turned-over phone, the managed profile, the practiced art of being present in a room while keeping the most specific parts of yourself interior. inaccessible, safe. I'd gotten so good at it that I'd started to confuse it with privacy, as if hiding things and choosing not to share them were the same act, which they are not. Privacy is something you decide. Hiding is something fear decides for you. Derek hadn't made me afraid. I want to be clear about that, and I want to be clear about it because I think it would be easier and tidier and more satisfying to a certain kind of story if he had. If I could locate the beginning of all of it in him, trace the damage to one source. But the truth is, he found me already fluent in making myself smaller, and he recognized that fluency, and he used it. The architecture was already there. He just moved in. That was the thing I needed to sit with, and sitting with it was not comfortable. Dr. Osei, my therapist, had a way of asking questions that felt almost offhand until you were 3 sentences into answering them and realized you'd said something you hadn't known you knew. In the session after the gallery, I told her about posting the photo. She nodded, asked what it had felt like. I said it felt like almost nothing, which surprised me. She asked what I'd expected it to feel like. I said I'd expected to want to take it down immediately. She asked why I'd thought that. I said because it was visible, because people could see it, because there was something in me that still operated on the assumption that being fully visible was a risk. She asked when I'd learned that. I sat with that question for the entire session and most of the walk home. The answer was not a single moment. It was the accumulation of 1,000 small moments across a life every time a room had made it clear. In the subtle arithmetic of looks and silences and the things people didn't say, that certain versions of you were easier to be around when they were quieter. You learn. You adapt. You tell yourself it's just context reading, just social awareness, just knowing your audience. And eventually the adaptation becomes so habitual that you forget you made it. You forget there was a version of you before the adjustment. I was 23 years old and I was just starting to remember what that version felt like. Cass and I didn't talk for 2 weeks after her apartment. I want to be honest about that because I think these stories sometimes skip over the in-between. The part where someone has hurt you and you care about them and both of those things are true at the same time and you don't know how to be in the same room until you figure out how to hold both. We texted a few times, nothing substantial. Just the small maintenance of a friendship that had a crack in it but hadn't broken. A link she sent me. A brief response to something I'd posted. The kind of contact that says I'm still here without demanding anything back. The call that actually mattered came on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after I'd stood in her kitchen with my phone and made her look at the timestamps. She called this time. Not me. I let it ring once, twice, deciding. Then I picked up. Hi, she said. Hey. A pause. I've been thinking about what to say for 2 weeks, and I still don't have a version that feels like enough. Her voice was quieter than usual. Not the careful, measured Cass, the other one. The one from late nights and hard conversations. The one that came out when she was saying something that cost her something. So I'm just going to say the thing instead of the version of it. Okay, I said. I protected him instead of you. I told myself I was protecting you, that's what I said to myself. But when I look at it honestly, I protected him. I kept his secret because blowing it up felt like more than I knew how to do. And because he asked me to. And because somewhere in there I prioritized how complicated it would make things over what you actually needed. She stopped. And you were the one who needed it. The protection. Not him. I was quiet for a moment. Outside my window, the evening was settling in. I know, I said. That's not enough. What I did. No, I said. It wasn't. Okay. She sounded like she'd prepared for me to say that, had sat with it and decided she could take it. I'm not asking you to be fine with it right now. I just needed to say the true thing instead of the easier thing. Something in my chest shifted. Not all the way. Not forgiveness tied up neatly. Not the version of this where we hung up and everything was restored. Just a movement. A first degree of something. I'm not fine with it, I said. But I know you've been carrying it. And I know you made a bad call with bad information and incomplete understanding of what you were standing in the middle of. I paused. And I know that you have been my closest person for 4 years, and I'm not prepared to lose that because of Derek. Of all the things he doesn't deserve to be the reason I lose you. She exhaled. It was shaky at the edges. Ryan, but we're going to talk about it again, I said. Not tonight. At some point we're going to actually talk about why you didn't tell me. Not the explanation, the real reason. The fear underneath it. Yeah, she said quietly. I know. I'm ready for that. We stayed on the phone for another hour after that. Not talking about Derek, just talking. Catching up on the 2 weeks of things we'd been not telling each other. Filling in the gaps. By the time we hung up, it was past 9 and something that had been held rigid in my chest for weeks had gone slightly less rigid. Not fixed, but moving in the right direction. And then there is Derek. I know you've been waiting for this part. I know because it's the part I was waiting for too. For a long time, the confrontation, the closure conversation, the scene where I say the things I needed to say, directly to the person who needed to hear them, where he has to sit with what he did, where I walk away feeling like something got resolved. That scene didn't happen, and it took me a long time to stop waiting for it. I saw him twice more at the studio before he announced he was leaving a better opportunity. Different firm. The kind of departure that gets a goodbye email and a card passed around the office and a low-key drinks thing I didn't go to. Both times I saw him in those final weeks, we exchanged the same professional, surface-level courtesy we'd been exchanging since November. He looked both times exactly like himself. Unhurried, composed, like someone who had successfully moved from one chapter to the next without looking back. I used to think I needed him to acknowledge it, to sit down across from me and say, I know what I did. I know how I used you. I'm sorry. Some version of that. Some recognition that I had existed in his life as a real person with real stakes, and not just a situation to be managed. I don't think that anymore. Not because I stopped being angry. I was angry for a long time. In waves. The way grief comes in waves. And some days it was about Derek specifically, and some days it was about something older and larger that he had activated but hadn't created. But because I eventually understood, slowly and without drama, that he was not equipped to give me what I needed, not because he was incapable of feeling, but because a person who could do what he did maintain that level of compartmentalization, keep someone in the dark that thoroughly for that long while building something entirely different in the adjacent space. That person had made choices about what mattered to them, and I was not going to change that with a conversation. Closure is a thing you build yourself. I know that sounds like something you put on a coffee mug, but I mean it mechanically, the literal closing of something. You have to do it. It doesn't come from the other person. They don't have to give you anything for you to be done. I was done. That was the thing I woke up and understood one morning about 6 weeks after everything. And it didn't arrive with ceremony. I was making coffee, the ordinary morning light coming through the window, and I just noticed it. He had moved to a different firm. He was somewhere in this city building a life that had no space in it for honesty about who he was. And that was going to be his problem for a very long time, and it had nothing to do with me anymore. I finished my coffee, went to work, sat at a desk he no longer occupied. The absence of him was, if anything, a relief. Marcus texted about the show he'd mentioned, a few weeks after the gallery. Casual, no pressure, just the details and a question mark. I said I was in. The show was smaller than the first, a photography exhibition in a narrow space in a neighborhood I didn't know well. He was already there when I arrived, standing near the entrance with a cup of wine, and he waved when he saw me with the easy recognition of someone picking up a conversation that had been paused rather than ended. We moved through the space slowly. He knew things about photography the way he'd known things about the painting, not showing off, just genuinely interested, sharing it because it made the experience bigger. I found myself talking more than I usually did in social situations, and not monitoring it. Not calculating the appropriate amount to offer before pulling back. At one point he stopped in front of a photo, a portrait, a man about our age looking directly at the camera with an expression that was hard to categorize, something between defiance and exhaustion, and he said, quietly, "This one takes me a while every time I see it. You've seen it before? It was in a show last year. It's one of my favorite things this photographer has done." He looked at it for another moment. He said in an interview that the subject had just come out to his family the week before this was taken, and they hadn't all taken it well, and he asked him to just be in the photo. Nothing performed. Just be there. I looked at the photograph again with that information. "You can see it," I said. "Yeah," Marcus said. "You can see all of it." We stood there for a while. Later, at the coffee place down the street, we talked for 2 hours about things that ranged widely: his work, my work, a book we'd both read, a trip he and Theo were planning, what my neighborhood was like, whether I'd lived in the city long. Normal, wide-ranging, unhurried conversation. And at some point I mentioned, because it came up naturally and I let it come up rather than steering around it, that I'd been through something rough in the past few months, a relationship that had been hidden, that had ended badly, that I was still working through. He didn't make it into a big moment, just nodded, said something about how those situations, the ones where you're not allowed to exist fully, could do a particular kind of damage that wasn't always obvious right away. Said it like he knew, then asked if I was doing okay now. I thought about it honestly before I answered. I think I'm doing better than okay, I said. I'm doing actual. Like the real version, not the managed version. He smiled at that. Actual's underrated, he said. I laughed. And it was one of those laughs that comes from somewhere real, not performed, not social, the kind that surprises you slightly because you didn't know it was coming. I want to say something to you directly now. If you've stayed with me through all of this, and I hope you have, because this next part is the reason I wanted to tell the story in the first place. If someone only wants you in the dark, that is not love. I'm not even sure it's a relationship. It's a private arrangement that uses the language of love and the intimacy of love and some of the feelings of love, and it asks you to be grateful for those pieces while systematically denying you everything that makes love sustainable. The visibility, the dailiness, the ordinary fact of existing together in a world that other people also occupy. I spent 8 months in something like that. And before those 8 months, I had spent years, I don't know exactly how many, in the more general version of it. The adapted, adjusted, interior-facing way of moving through the world that made me available to that kind of arrangement in the first place. Because it felt familiar. Because familiar can feel like safety, even when it isn't. Here is what I know now that I didn't know then. The hiding was not something I owed anyone. Not Derek. Not any room I'd ever been in. Not the part of the world that would have found me easier to deal with if I had been quieter about what I was. The hiding was a thing I'd learned and could unlearn. It was not my nature. It was an adaptation that had outlived whatever use it ever had. You can put things down that you didn't consciously pick up. That's the thing nobody told me. Or maybe they told me and I wasn't ready to hear it. The weight you've been carrying that feels like just the weight of existing, sometimes it's actually optional. Sometimes you've just been holding it so long you forgot it wasn't yours. If any part of this is sitting in your chest right now, I need you to leave a comment. I mean it. Not because I'm asking for engagement, because I read every single one, and because there is something that matters about saying a true thing in a space where someone will actually receive it, even if it's just a few words. Even if it's just, me too. And if you're new here, subscribe. Stay. There's more of this, more of the real version, not the managed version. 3 months after everything, I was sitting at a coffee shop near my apartment on a Saturday afternoon. Laptop open, half working, the way Saturdays go. The place was warm and slightly crowded. That pleasant low hum of other people doing their own things. My phone was on the table beside my laptop. Face up, screen visible. Marcus texted. Something about the show next week and whether I'd seen the new work from the artist who'd done the blue painting. I read it. I typed back immediately, without looking around, without the half-second check that had become so habitual I'd stopped noticing it, the unconscious survey of who was nearby and who might see. Just read it and answered it. Face up on the table where anyone could have glanced over and seen the screen and understood exactly what they were looking at. A man texting his friend. The whole thing reading, responding, setting the phone back down took maybe 15 seconds. I looked back at my laptop. The coffee shop continued being a coffee shop. Outside, through the window, the street moved in its ordinary Saturday way. People passing with their dogs and their groceries and their specific, separate lives. I thought briefly about the 8 months, about the parking garages and the pulled blinds, about the careful, practiced work of being invisible in rooms I had every right to occupy, about standing 3 feet from someone I loved at a party and pretending I didn't know him beyond work, and driving home alone, and sitting in the car before I could go inside. Then I stopped thinking about it, not because it didn't matter, because I had thought about it enough, and named it enough, and carried it long enough that it had changed shape from something that defined what I was available for into something that had happened to me. Past tense. Done. The phone sat face up on the table. Small thing. Enormous thing. Enough.